So how was your week? Kind of started out interesting, right? I confess I'm a quitter. I didn't see what happened on Sunday. Yep. And then there was an interesting, one of my residents at Logan Creek says, kind of an odd quote. He says, "You know, Jesus never played football, but he did on Sunday." So I didn't see it. And then he asked me, "So are you going to watch Obama tonight?" "No." "Well, why not?" "I don't care." So I did care about that Seahawks game, but I didn't care about Obama, so I lay it all out. Well, yeah, bow your heads with me. Pray. Father in heaven, I just thank you so much for this church. I thank you for your people. And I thank you for your message that you've given to us from day one on this planet. You love us. And you gave us free will. And you gave us a choice, and we choose you now. Our hearts are open to you. Be on my lips. Be in our hearts. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen. How many of you have seen the movie Spartacus? It's an older movie, right? 50s, 60s, I can't remember. But I've seen it. And it was really good. It was really good. It was awesome. It was about a slave who took on the Roman Empire, the mighty empire. And it's a true story, I understand. Never studied into it. But do you remember who played Spartacus in the movie? And Miss Movie Buff? Kirk Douglas. Who knows who Kirk Douglas is? A lot of people do. All right. Agnes? Was Kirk Douglas pretty well known back in the day? Uh-oh, Agnes. She didn't watch movies. Oops. Steve, was Kirk Douglas well known back in the day? He was. He was a well-known actor in Hollywood. And he wrote an autobiography titled Climbing the Mountain, My Search for Meaning. And in that book, he recounts a story while he was driving back from somewhere, back to Hollywood, and he saw a Navy sailor on the side of the road. He decided, I'm going to be a nice guy today. I'm going to pick him up. So, pulls over. The Navy sailor opens up the back door, puts his bag in the back seat. He sits down there in the passenger seat. He sits down. And he looks over, and he looks away, and he looks back, and he looks away. And the third time he looks back and he stops and he says, "Do you know who you are?" And Douglas says, "It's an interesting question. Probably the deepest question anyone around you is going to ask you, right? Do you know who you are?" How about ask yourself, who am I? Do you have an answer? Michelle, you're a real estate agent, right? Is that what you say when someone says, "Who are you?" "I'm a real estate agent." Doesn't work, does it? "I'm a manager at a retirement community." Ron, you were a pastor. Who am I? We sometimes answer that pretty quickly, right? But deep down inside, do you know that answer? It's a deep, 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 deep question. And I've struggled with that one throughout my entire life. Our culture has an answer to that question. In fact, what is culture? I'd like to hear some people's answers. What is culture? Define it real quick. Beryl? that's a good way. I took a cultural anthropology class, and you explained it perfectly. Culture is simply a set of beliefs and lifestyle habits that a group of people all agree upon. Right? That's culture. Culture is actually attempting to answer the question, who am I? You've joined in with a group of people that think like you, act like you. Right? So, when we sit with all of us around here go, I'm a 12, we know what that means, right? All right. So that's the culture of our area. I'm a 12. But does that answer the question, who am I? I'm a 12? Pretty weak. So culture is attempting to answer the question. I think of my government, America. How does America answer the question of who we are? Well, specifically, the unique you. They have an answer for you. Huh? Freedom. Okay, the unique you, though. Think about this. The uniquely you. They've given you one. What's that? Yeah, you do. I'll give you mine. Mine's 5. Pretty lame, right? Pretty lame. That doesn't answer the question. But government does do that, and you type that information in, and I'm sure there's a list of stuff. Someone with power, anyway. I did go to Google. Google's a pretty cool thing. It presents a lot of culture, right? I typed in my name, Shane Struthers. Maybe Google would have an answer to who Shane Struthers is. 219,000 pages came up. I found myself on Facebook and a couple other places. But to be honest with you, Google doesn't know who I am. There was a lot of weird stuff just by the name of Shane Struthers. Interesting. I saw one, it was all these images. So I said, oh, what are images of Shane Struthers? And the third one was a picture of my grandma. That was pretty cool. So, who am I? Who are you? And I believe there's so many possible answers. So many people are out there living their lives, doing their thing with a simple answer. I'm a real estate agent, I'm a pastor, or I'm an athlete, or I'm a doctor, or I'm a lawyer. And they don't dig down. I'm a mother even. That's a pretty cool thing. I'm a mother, I'm a father. Does it really, really hit who you are? That's why I have submitted my life to this book, the Bible. The Bible has the answer. I think from Genesis all the way to Revelation, the answer is on every single page, right? Do you believe that? The answer to the question of who you are, of who I am, is in this book, every single page. And I thought we'd turn to one of these stories. Daniel chapter 1. To consider that question. Who am I? I also like the thought of going to Daniel, just because we've had Tyler here, right? And Tyler's been giving us some good talks, helping us to consider evangelism. And in April, right, we're doing an evangelistic series. And what is going to be discussed? What's a major book that we'll be going over in those evangelistic series? Daniel Revelation. I like Daniel. In fact, Daniel speaks to my childhood. And I want to focus on Daniel chapter 1. I love Daniel chapter 1 because it's that, what's that song we all sang as kids? Dare to be a Daniel. It comes from Daniel chapter 1. I'm going to be reading from my preaching Bible. I love this Bible. It was a good excuse to come to church with it today. I'm in the NIV, Daniel chapter 1. And before I get going, what was going on about this time? Just before Daniel was taken captive and taken to Babylon? What was going on in history? Huh? Jerusalem? Well, not quite. It was almost there. Jerusalem was actually besieged by Nebuchadnezzar 3 times. And the first time he was besieging it, King Jehoiakim kind of went, here you go. But Nebuchadnezzar's dad was dying back in Babylon, so he took off. But he also took a bunch of captives with him, some money, some people. Daniel was a part of that group. But Judah was pretty weak. In fact, they got their clocks cleaned every time they got into a battle with somebody. Their sin had reached a limit, and Egypt beat up on them. Assyria had kind of beat up on them a little bit. They were getting beat up a lot. They were a very weak country at this time. So, considering that, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. I like verse 2. And the Lord delivered King Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. It's an interesting text, or an interesting way of writing it, right? Judah was a very weak nation. They were getting their rear ends kicked every time they fought somebody. But what does Daniel say? The Lord did, yeah. Nebuchadnezzar didn't beat Judah. The Lord handed Judah over to Nebuchadnezzar. That's a key point. As we enter into the study of Daniel, you have to get this point. Why was Daniel written? It was written for this reason alone. God is ruler of the universe. Right? God is ruler of the past. God is ruler of the present. And He's ruler of the future. That's why Daniel was written. And so, right there in the 2nd verse, the Lord delivered Jehoiakim. Nebuchadnezzar didn't beat Jehoiakim. It was God's decision and God's choice. And then, verse 3. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials. King James Version. Does anyone know that part? Does anyone have that? Huh? What? I heard it. He was the master of the eunuchs. What does that mean? Come on, don't be afraid. Huh? Gelding? Another word? They castrated. Alright, so he was the chief of those who have been castrated. And the king ordered all these nobility and these Israelites who had been taken from their homes, kidnapped, if you will, and brought into the palace of the king. And back in those days, if you were going to live in the palace of the king and you were male, that's what had to happen. Your manhood was taken. You were too close to the king's harem, I guess. The Israelites were from royal family and nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, qualified to serve the king in his palace. He, Ashpenaz, was to teach them language and literature of the Babylonians. And the king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. And then among them from Judah, were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. And the chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach. And to Azariah, Abednego. Not a big deal, right? I gotta check. By the way, everyone turned their cell phones off, right? I didn't type out my sermon. I wanted to go extemporaneously, but there is a couple of notes here. The names. Those names are very important. Daniel, does anyone know what Daniel means? The Lord is my judge. Hananiah means the Lord is gracious. Mishael means the one who comes from God. And Azariah, the Lord is my helper. But Ashpenaz says, no, those aren't your names. I'm giving you a new name. Daniel, you're Belteshazzar. Belteshazzar means the keeper of the secrets of Baal, the Babylonian god. And then Hananiah's name, Shadrach, was the inspiration of the sun god. Mishael, the one who belongs to the goddess Sheshach. And Azariah was Abednego, and his name meant Nebo, servant of Nebo, the morning star. Their identities were being messed with, right? If there's anything like, a psychologist comes in or psychiatrist that says they're in an identity crisis, I would say these four guys were in an identity crisis. Their manhood was taken. They were ripped out of their homes, their friends, their family. They were in a foreign land. They were being forced to learn new things that they didn't really agree with. I can't imagine. I don't think any of us can imagine what these guys were going through. And on any one of these points, if they wanted to be Jewish and to show their Jewishness, they could have stood up and said, we're not doing that. But they didn't. Except for one thing. In verse 8, but Daniel resolved. I find that interesting. There's four guys, but it's Daniel resolves. I think that's pretty key. Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. And he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. In verse 9, and God caused the official to show favor and sympathy to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, I'm afraid, my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink, why should you see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would have my head because of you. So, Ashpenaz, the captain of the eunuchs, is a little scared. Like, I like you guys, but if I went to the king, or the king said, hey, how come these guys look really bad? Because they're not eating my food. He might take my head. So Daniel, in a nice political way, says, okay, here's a test. The test is we're going to eat vegetables and we're going to drink water for 10 days. We're not going to eat the king's food. And we'll see who's healthier. We'll see who's stronger. We'll see who's smarter. Why? First of all, why the test? Why didn't they say, you know what, my name is not Belteshazzar, my name's Daniel. You can't call me that. He could have, right? Why did he resolve to not defile himself with food? Leviticus 11 comes to mind, maybe? Right? They were keeping the ceremonial law, the Levitical code. Were they keeping the Levitical code completely, being in Babylon, I wonder? I don't know. But one thing they said, we're not going to eat this food. And I think Leviticus 11 definitely plays a part in it, but I think it's deeper than that. I think it's way deeper than, I'm not going to defile myself, because think about it. If you didn't want to make hay, and you walk into the palace, there's this big table full of food, don't you think you could have your plate and you could pick out the stuff that's kosher? Right? That's what I'm thinking I would do. I wouldn't want to make hay. Okay, where's the pork? I'm not touching that. Where's the beef? Throw the beef on, extra beef because I'm hungry. And then there's no stink, right? I think it's deeper than Leviticus 11. What's the main theme of Daniel? Why was it written? God is sovereign. God is ruler of the past, the present, and the future. They found a point that they could kind of, in a nice way, tell the king off. The king Babylon was the most powerful nation on planet Earth. And they had the best food that you can think of from planet Earth. I mean, I'm sure there was food all over. I like Mexican food and Chinese food. They probably didn't have that. But the best food of the time was right there in the king's palace. And he said, here's my food on my table. This is the same food, the same drink that I drink, and it's yours. And all of you, I've defeated you Egyptians, I've defeated you Assyrians, I've defeated you Jewish people. Eat my food. Learn our philosophy. Have people call you by your new names. You have a new identity. What's he doing? He's brainwashing them. What's he want them to do? Become Babylonian. Don't be afraid. You guys can talk. If I'm talking, you can talk. Yeah, he wanted the people to become Babylonian. In fact, history tells us that Nebuchadnezzar is the first king to actually step up and not move into a country and defeat them and just kill everybody. That's how war was fought back in the old days. They would kill everybody. When he would take over a land, he would take all the nobility and assimilate. Take them back to Babylon and assimilate the nobility. He would strip nobility of all their riches, of all their titles, of everything, and make them his. And then you know what he would do? He would let the poor people of the land live and say, here you go, all this property is yours, you just pay me taxes. Brilliant idea. It was brilliant political strategy. But he was the first one to catch up. Hey, I don't have to kill everybody. He saved money on war and actually got more money coming through on taxes. He was assimilating their minds to become Babylonian. Your identity is no longer Assyrian. Your identity is no longer an Egyptian or a Jew. You're Babylonian. And how did he do it? He was doing it with pleasure. In the courts of the palace, the doors of opportunity were opened. You could go wherever you wanted. All you had to do was follow the Babylonian rules, the Babylonian code. And they put their nose up at it. They said, nope, I'm not going to eat the king's food. And I think, yes, definitely Leviticus 11 played a part. I agree with that. But it's much deeper. Because what they were saying is, King, you are not my sustainer. God is. King, you have everything on this planet, but it means nothing. The provisions of this life mean nothing to us. God is the Creator. He's our God. And He's alive. And He's going to save us. In the lap of luxury, they stood up against the king. I think it's pretty cool. Because they were being prepared. Something else was coming down the pike for them. And see, God, what He does, I think Daniel is very key, as we'll be talking about in our evangelistic series, especially in the last days. Because in the lap of luxury, if you're being tested, because that's how the enemy's testing us right now, right? I think America's pretty plush. Pretty Babylonian. That's why I didn't listen to Obama's speech. I don't care. Not that he's Babylonian or whatever, but I feel like I'm living in Babylon. I don't know about you. Yes, we have freedom to do what we want, say what we want, but I'll tell you what, every time I bring up Jesus to people outside of this building, I get dirty looks. Unless they're a Christian also. Don't you guys feel like there's a squeezing, a pressure of people who are not Christians? I sense it. I sense it big time. So, the lap of luxury and the tests. What came later for the three Hebrews? They had to make a stand, right? For their lives. Persecution. And then Daniel, the no prayer law in Persia came out. He got thrown into the lion's den. Persecution. I think that we should maybe parallel this a little bit in our own lives. If we're unable to stand up in the lap of luxury, in the halls of pleasure and no persecution. We're in the palace, if you will. If we're unable to stand up in the palace for God and answer the question, who am I? Are you going to answer the question when persecution comes? I ask that question to myself all the time, and I know if I can't, when things are going easy, I'm not going to when persecution comes. I think for those of us who are Adventists, we've often waited. Oh, we need persecution, because when persecution comes, that's when I'm going to turn it on. Right? Have any of you ever thought that? Be honest. Just a little bit. Because that's when we can really define ourselves. Right now, it's a hodgepodge of just a little bit of relativity. Everything's this way and this. There's nothing truly defined. And that's American culture. We're just a melting pot of everything. But once persecution comes, then I can stand up and I'm an Adventist. I'm going to die for this message. And then Jesus will come, save us. I used to think like that. Yeah, Beryl? You're getting to my end. You're leapfrogging to the very end. Very good. It's very true. So, they took a test. Going back to Daniel, they took a test. They were eating vegetables and they were drinking water only for 10 days. And in verse 15, it says, at the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than the other young men who had ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and wine. They were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. Okay, so because Daniel and his three friends ate only vegetables and drank only water, that's what I'm going to do the rest of my life, right? That's the method. Right? Well, that's what they were doing. That's why they passed the test. Let's go to Daniel chapter 10, just real quick. Daniel chapter 10. Verse 2. At this time, I, Daniel, mourned for 3 weeks. He was having these visions, right? We're going to get to those visions here pretty soon, a few months. And he was mourning for 3 weeks. He wanted an answer for what these visions meant. And in verse 3, I ate no choice food, no meat or wine touched my lips. And I used no lotions at all until the 3 weeks were over. So, Daniel didn't just eat vegetables and drink water. okay? Daniel took a test so he could tell the king, you don't provide for me. My God provides. That's where it was. It was a test of identity. And Daniel and his 3 friends won out because Ashpenaz was blown away. Whoa, these guys look healthier. That's a miracle. Really, if you're just eating just vegetables and drinking water, you're probably going to look a little more feeble than someone who's eating a little more protein and lifting weights at the gym. I've tried it. You get weaker. Yeah, elephants. I'm a human. So, in verse 17, this is pretty cool. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding in all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. So as a result of the test, the pressure cooker of Babylon, here's your identity. We're going to take your manhood. We're going to give you new names. We're going to teach you our philosophy that goes contrary to what you believe and what you understand. You are going to answer in the Babylon culture, and you're going to understand, and you're going to become one of us. And they said no. And what did God do? He gave them something special. He gave them understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. I don't believe that it was the vegetables and the water that gave them the increase in knowledge. It was God, supernaturally lifting them up and giving them something special, saying, these are my 4 awesome sons who I'm well pleased, who are willing to take a stand and say to the king of earth at that point, strongest nation earth has ever seen, saying, you don't sustain us. And God blessed them. So where are we? Who are we? We're a little church here in Mount Vernon, right? We're getting ready for an evangelistic series. We're hoping that people will come in and fill these pews that we don't know, who will learn about God. The God who is King of the universe. The God who is Master of the past, ruler of the present, and sovereign of the future. And I think it's important that we have an answer to that question as a church. But before we get to the answer as a church, we've got to answer it for ourselves. Who am I? Do you truly put your trust in this Bible? Are you trusting in your title? Are you trusting in your bank account? I want to, before people come in, I want to, for my own life, I'm testing myself, and I'm going to the Lord, and I'm asking, Lord, who am I? Help to find me. Help to find me. And I think we've all been given the answer. Beryl, I'm going right there. The answer's right here. And we can hear it, and we can hear it, we can read it, we can read it. We've got to experience it. And I'm not going to tell you how that happens, because I think that happens on your knees as the Holy Spirit works in your heart and on your mind. Each of you need to have that answered. Who am I? I like to, whenever I preach, if I'm in the Old Testament, I love to go to the New Testament too. In John chapter 13, Jesus is our example. He's our model. He's God's Son. He's the Son of God. And I love this text in John chapter 13, verse 3. I'm blown away when I really consider everything Jesus gave up. He was a prince in heaven, the prince, not just a prince. He was the prince in heaven. And He gave it up to come down here and live with us crazy, insane humans who kill each other, do just terrible things. So much sickness, death, pain, and misery. But He entered into this experience. Not just to touch us, but to be touched by humanity as well. But he didn't lose his focus. Verse 3 says, Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. That was the night before he was about to die. That was his focus. He knew who he was. At every step of the path, the journey that he had to take, he knew who he was. He never once doubted. I doubt. I struggle. All of you have doubted at times. Where do I stand with God? Am I forgiven for this? Am I forgiven for that? Jesus' mission was for you and me. Jesus' mission was to not fail at every step, and he didn't. His mission was to stay consistent with his purpose. His mission was to declare to you and me the kingdom of God. And what's the kingdom of God? You're in it. That's the kingdom of God. I like Hebrews chapter 2 says, Jesus is not ashamed to call us brothers and sisters. He's not ashamed to call you a brother or a sister. And if you're a brother and a sister of Jesus, then you're what, Farrell? A son of God, a daughter of God. I even like it. One of the best sermons I ever heard. You're a prince. You're a princess in the kingdom of heaven. Before we have people coming into our church, we've got to believe that. We've got to experience that. I have to. And I'm committing myself to that. Because I think that's the only place where we get health and healing as a community. By truly answering that question and living that out in our daily lives and telling the king of this world, I don't care what you have to talk about, State of the Union, universal health care. I'm not putting it down. I'm apolitical, by the way, people. I don't really care what parties have to say. I'm not a part of any party. I'm a son of God. Who are you? Who am I? Isaiah 43 says, because you are precious and honored in my sight, I love you. Who are you? Who am I? You're loved, and I'm loved.